Hello there, and welcome to this webinar in which we're going to talk about the why and what. This webinar is organized in collaboration with advisors. Before we get started with today's webinar, let me give me a quick moment to introduce myself. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg, and I'm the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can find all my contact details. So if after the webinar you would like to get in touch with me or ask any kind of questions or to do a follow-up on some of the contents, please always feel free to reach out to me. The Enterprise Big Data Framework is an independent body of knowledge that is there to enhance capability and knowledge in big data best practices. The world of big data has been growing very rapidly in recent years. And what we're aiming to do with the association is to combine professionals and different thought leaders to learn more and standardize for organizations. This way, we can develop a vendor-neutral approach towards education. Enhancing knowledge and skills is going to be crucial in order for companies to get started with big data. As part of the Enterprise Big Data Framework Association, we're making sure that we're providing course materials, certifications, and professional education schemes to make sure that there's a uniform standard for everyone who wants to learn more within big data. And in today's webinar, we're going to look into that a little bit more in detail. We're going to have a look at what you can do to get started. We're going to see what are the steps that you can take in order to start building capability. And most importantly, what are exactly some of those capabilities that you can build? Good, so I've prepared for today a short little overview with some of the objectives of this webinar. I always think that at the end of the webinar, you should have a number of key outcomes, and you can see them here listed on the next slide. At the end of this session, you should have a better understanding of why big data is such a large topic and why so many enterprise organizations are busy with this on a day-to-day basis. But we won't only explore the why. We're also going to go more in detail about the what. And we're going to see what capabilities do you need to set up in order to start building capabilities within your own organization. And in order to do that, we will be using the Big Data Framework, which I will introduce in the third major topic of this webinar. The Big Data Framework will provide you with an overview of what are the different areas in which you can start building capabilities. So it's going to teach you how you can get started with some of these first steps. What are the key areas to look at? And what are the key things that you should take into consideration? That's what we will discuss in this first 45 minutes, and I'll break that down into a number of different topics. As you will see, most of the materials that are coming from this webinar are coming from the Enterprise Big Data Reference Guides, which you can download for free online. So if after the session you're interested in learning more, please feel free to visit the websites and download the guides for free. Good, let's get started with our first topic for today, which is to understand a little bit more about big data. Why is it relevant and why is this such a buzzword? Why are so many companies busy with this? Let us start with giving you a bit of an overview of the enormous amount of growth that we've seen in big data certifications, and especially knowledge that is required. If you look at job vacancies, the number of people with skills in big data, data analysis, or analytics is increasing year over year. In many countries across the world, there is a huge demand for data analysts and data scientists. So what is the reason behind that? Why are so many companies searching for these kinds of skills? The reason is pretty straightforward. A lot of organizations are realizing that the data that they're collecting from their users, consumers, or even their products contains a lot of valuable information. With that information, they're able to make competitive decisions and outperform competitors who don't do that. Within your data sets about your customers, you can, for instance, start to segmentize them in order to make predictions about which customer will make a purchase next. Or for instance, in production, you can start to make predictive models to see which elements will fill the fastest. So the main summary is that there is a lot of value that is hidden within your data set. And it's up to companies to start to explore that. in order to make sure that they can start basing these kinds of decisions based on the data that they have. And this is the concept that in many organizations is known as data-driven decision-making. And with the big data framework, we're trying to aim to teach you how you can actually do this. So a lot of organizations by now know this. They know that data contains valuable information. However, the part that they're struggling with is, how do we extract that? How do we make sure that if we go through our data sets, that we can make these more better and valuable decisions? And that's exactly where the big data framework comes in. I've been involved with data questions for almost a decade. And what I found is that a lot of organizations are really struggling to set up a comprehensive structure in order to analyze big data sets. A lot of companies do have the tools, they have the technology available to do this, but in order to get a good return on investment, there's typically a larger problem in order to extract that. And that's why the big data framework was created. Many organizations lack the skills and knowledge in order to build these capabilities. And that's where the big data framework comes in. What we wanted to do is create a vendor-independent approach to analyzing large quantities of data. And what we found is that most of the other programs are highly driven around a particular technology, like programming. I'm not saying that programming is not important. I'm just saying that in order to build capabilities, you need to look at multiple aspects. Not just the technology aspects, but for also the human aspects, which we typically refer to as the human aspect of big data. So there's a great demand for standardization. And what we've been trying to do over the last few years is combine the knowledge that has resulted in a number of key best practices. And that is what the big data framework is. It's a very practical and hands-on approach that looks at a number of key capabilities that you would need to build in order to structurally retrieve value from data. So let's look a little bit deeper into why this is relevant. In order to standardize, we've chosen to make this an open source collaboration. So what we're aiming to do with the big data framework is to promote collaboration across different organizations and even across different countries and industries. And so far, this has been proven an approach that works. We have partners in every continent and experts that are contributing towards developing the framework in a variety of different regions. So far, the big data framework has been through a number of revisions, and it's keep improving and becoming better with every step. What we're also trying to do is set a global standard when it comes towards certification. And with these certifications, we're providing a uniform approach so that everyone across the world will have the same standards when it comes towards big data. This is the reason that we're building a community of experts so that certifications across the globe adhere towards the same standard. The webinar that we're organizing with advisors today is one of our partners. So if you're ever interested in learning more or getting certifications by yourself, I highly recommend that you reach out to them. The basic idea of creating this open community is that we're providing a free Creative Commons licenses, meaning that everyone can start using the materials that I'm presenting here today. Good, so who is it aimed for? Well, the big data framework has a number of important target audiences. First of all, it's everyone who's new to big data. So if you want to learn more, if you want to know where to get started, then this is the right approach for you. When I started my career in data science over a decade ago, I found it very difficult to find a uniform approach that would take me step by step and learning me more about the concepts, the theory, and the processes. The second key target audience is for large enterprise organizations. The framework is called the Enterprise Big Data Framework because it looks at organizations that are typically significantly larger and that are struggling with elements like culture, processes, and different data that is stored at different locations. So especially organizations that aim to professionalize their big data organizations can use the framework in order to start increasing capability. And the last part is the education industry. With the free guides and the materials that we're making available online, the big data framework provides a body of knowledge that every educational institute can use in order to grow further. Good. So what we've done in constructing the big data different roles is that we looked at a number of the common job roles and skills that are required within big data. So typically, if you look at vacancies online, you see that there's a request for data scientists, database administrators, or for instance, analysts or researchers. So what we've done in the program is that we have mapped these skills towards the in-demand job roles that are out there, and that we've tried to really create certifications and schemes that are in line with these different requirements. And with these different requirements, we're going to train you how you can perform well within that role. I'll come back towards that in a second in a little bit more detail. Good, so let's look a little bit more about the capabilities of big data. You now know why the big data framework was created, so let's continue with a discussion of what. So what is it that you can actually do? And what do I mean when I say that we're looking at different capabilities that can be built up? How can you get started, and what are the approaches to take? So let me take you on a brief tour of the Enterprise Big Data Framework. A conceptual model and overview of the Big Data Framework you can see on the slide in front of you. And as you can see, it consists of 6 major capability domains. Let me briefly run you through them. In order to be successful with big data in any organizations, you would need to start building capabilities in a number of different areas. And it all starts with defining a big data strategy, which you can see at the heart of the Big Data Framework. A big data strategy is necessary to guide the organization, make investment decisions, and to really ensure that there's a positive return on investment for your investment in big data solutions. It's really the first step and also a very logical one, because in the end, it's just a business decision. The reason that you want to get started with big data is so that you can ensure that you can make better decisions than your competitors, because in the end, that's the end result. However, building a strategy alone is not enough. You will also need to look at the technology components. And that's what brings us towards the architecture section. In a big data architecture, you would need to look at the technical capabilities and requirements to process massive quantities of data. And this requires different storage solutions and different processing solutions. You would need to set up your IT environment and infrastructure in such a way that it can accommodate the processing of large quantities of data. So within the big data architecture domain and capability, you would need to set up the elements in order to accommodate that. The third element has to do with algorithms. In order to retrieve value from data, you would need to query through large data sets, applying existing or sometimes new algorithms to retrieve the value for you. That means that you will also need to have some knowledge, especially how those algorithms work, and especially which algorithm to choose in what particular situation. The big data algorithm section explores these capabilities in further detail. And this is typically what data analysts and data scientists do in more detail. In the fourth element of the Enterprise Big Data Framework, we are going to discuss processes, because in every large organization, processes are the way in which we can make sure that we can control things. This segment also looks at the increasing level of regulatory requirements. So for instance, when we talk about data security or data privacy, these are processes that you would need to manage over time. Big data processes are very fundamental for larger organizations. So starting to define them, setting them up, and also to make sure that you're following them in terms of compliance is paramount to success. The fifth, and maybe my personal favorite in the big data framework, are the big data functions. And this is the people aspect with regards to big data. Within the people aspect, we're going to look at what are the knowledge and skills that you would need in order to set it up within your own company. We're also going to review here how to build a big data center of excellence. In the sixth major and last element, we're going to look at artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is the domain that is looking at how do we retrieve value through machines in order to make sure that this is done in a more perfect way. Artificial intelligence algorithms will include things like machine learning. How can we predict different data components, and how do we make sure that this is becoming better over time? We're going to look at common algorithms here in order to make sure that we cannot just predict it one time, but to make sure that things will be done better over a longer period of time. So this is a quick overview of the 6 major components of the enterprise big data framework. Let me dive into each of these 6 capabilities in a little bit more detail to give you a bit of a better overview. But before I do that, let me give you an overview of the big data certification scheme. As I mentioned a couple of slides ago, what we're trying to do with big data is to increase the level of capability within each of these 6 domains. So in order to get started by yourself, we've created a guide which is known as the Enterprise Big Data Professional, which explains all of the different concepts and key capabilities of the Enterprise Big Data Framework. So after this webinar, if you're interested in order to learn more about that, I highly recommend that you download this guide. Let me get started with giving you a bit of an overview of why a big data strategy is important. One of the very famous quotes that I really like to use in this regard is the one that you see on the left on this slide. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. There is so much data out there that it's going to be impossible to analyze all of the data within your organization. Massive quantities of data are produced every single day. So it's up to your own organization in order to retrieve value from that. And in order to do that, you will need to have a comprehensive strategy. So on this slide, you will see the process on how you can start to define a strategy. You need to start with defining business objectives, look at what your current capabilities are, and then start to prioritize a number of different use cases where you can be successful with big data. This is really a crucial element to make sure that big data is going to be valuable in the long run. This will result in a big data roadmap. And this is how most organizations can get started with picking their first projects and showing a positive return on investment. Next to the strategy, we would need to have an architecture in place. And as I mentioned a couple of slides ago, the architecture provides you with a technical environment that you would need in order to process massive quantities of data. In order to do this, we've created the reference architecture, which is based on the NIST infrastructure reference architecture. And on the next slide, you see the key components. Note that in order to set up an infrastructure that is able to accommodate that, you would need to set up things like orchestration, a big data framework provider, and comprehensive way in which you can import and export data within your data pipeline. Unfortunately, in this webinar, we don't have the time to go into this picture in detail. But note that the architecture section, which is also covered in big data architecture, is going to look at each of these different domains in detail. Architecture is the same as setting up your tool stack. And note that there are hundreds, if not thousands of different tools available. But in order to benefit from that and to have a cost-efficient approach, you would first need to align that technology and that technology stack with the big data strategy that you've defined in the first place. Only after you've done that, you can start to pick tools which are able to support your strategic objectives. After the algorithms section, it's time to look at what are the key knowledge that we would need in order to retrieve value from data. Every organization with a budget is able to source for significant tools that are able to help them. But what is going to make a difference is that your organization also knows what are they looking for in that large quantities of data. And in order to do that, you would need to know something about algorithms. So in the algorithm section of the Big Data Framework, we're looking at the key capabilities that organizations need in order to retrieve value from data. And that means learning more about algorithms. On the slide in front of you, you see, for instance, an example of a clustering algorithm that is, for instance, able to group customer data into a number of different customer profiles. Based on these customer profiles, you can subsequently, for instance, target marketing campaigns so that not every customer will receive the same information. This is an effective and proven strategy to make sure that you increase sales. I'm just showing this here as an example, but there are dozens, if not hundreds of different algorithms available. And it's up to the data analyst and data scientist to select the right algorithm in a specific situation. Good, after we've looked at algorithms, now it's time to move on towards processes. And as I mentioned earlier, big data processes are there to support organizations and bring structure. There's different domains of processes that you would need to take into consideration. For instance, the analytics process that looks at the way that we extract value from data and make sure that it's done in a reproducible way. We would need to look at data management processes that are looking at what is the data that is in our organization actually valid, and is the quality of data sufficient to support our decision making. And the last element has to do with data governance. So here we're talking about data privacy, data security aspects that are going to be really crucial to make sure that your data is compliant towards regulatory standards. Especially for larger enterprise organizations, this is a key area that they should need to address. Data analysis is done in exactly the same way. So what we are looking at in these different elements is how can we process that? And here on the slide in front of you, you see an example of a data analysis process. Moving from the objectives towards the left, towards ingestion, preparation, analysis, and presentation. So by building this data pipeline, you're able to make sure that you're extracting value from data in a very, very consistent way. Building processes is typically the crucial element that is necessary in order to build reproductive knowledge in an organization, and especially in large ones. Then let's look at the people aspect a bit more in detail. Starting with data-driven decision-making and starting with big data in any organization requires change. And therefore, you need to really start thinking about the way that that change will impact on the people. What are the teams that you would need to set up? What are the knowledge and skills that are going to be required? Big data functions addresses those different elements that are necessary from a people perspective. And in order to support that, one of the proven best practices is to start establishing a big data center of excellence. A big data center of excellence is a centralized, uniform point in your organization where you can start to build knowledge around big data best practices. It will consist of the team that is able to analyze it. Start with defining how you can build successful proof of concepts, but also, for instance, look at the financial aspects. On the slide in front of you, you see a couple of core components of a big data center of excellence. And note that all of these are important in order to structure it and set up teams that are able to retrieve that value from the data. Last but not least, the big data framework covers artificial intelligence, which is very closely related towards big data. The difference between artificial intelligence and big data is that within artificial intelligence, we're mimicking human decision-making. In a practical sense, that means that we're going to use AI algorithms on the same amounts of big data that we've discussed so far. Although the approach is slightly different than, for instance, traditional big data algorithms, because we need, for instance, machine learning, knowledge representation, automated reasoning, and NLP, as you can see here on the right-hand side of the slide. This artificial intelligence builds upon the big data organization and the capabilities that you've already set up. And this is why AI is depicted as a circle or ring around some of the other capabilities. You can only truly start with AI if you have a number of these other things in place, like a big data architecture or process. Then taking the next steps with designing and implementing AI algorithms is not going to be tremendously more difficult if those capabilities have all been built up. Good. So what I've done in the last segment is provided you with a key overview of the 6 core capabilities of the Enterprise Big Data Framework. And this will give you an overview of how to get started with big data in any organization. Any organization will need to build up capabilities within these 6 domains, and they're equally important. It's really not possible to get value from data if you don't know anything about algorithms. However, it's also important that you know what to look for, like for instance, the strategy. So all of these 6 key capabilities interface with each other. And because it's a capability model, you're also able to measure and see how far you are within each of those different capability domains. So what I highly encourage you to do is think about how you are currently performing in each of these 6 different domains. Where are your strengths and weaknesses? And start to address the elements or capabilities where you don't think you're so strong yourself by starting to significantly improve your capability in that domain. Good. In this previous section, we started to look at what you can do. And what you can do is make sure that you understand those capabilities of the Enterprise Big Data Framework and how to get started. In this last and final section, we're going to start to look a little bit deeper into the knowledge domain. If you want to learn more, how can you get started? And if you want to build capability, what are some of the first steps that you can take? When I started my journey into big data, I found that it was very difficult to find a uniform, standardized, and vendor-independent approach that would guide you on the way to learn more about that. And that's why we created around the Enterprise Big Data Framework a number of key certifications in collaboration with APMG International. The 3 certifications that you see on the slide are really the starting points to learn more about the Enterprise Big Data Framework, but also to dive deeper into algorithms, architecture, and looking at some of the introductions towards artificial intelligence. The Enterprise Big Data Professional level will really give you an introduction towards the Big Data Framework and is going to discuss in detail the 6 core capabilities that I've just mentioned. The Enterprise Big Data Analyst level takes it one step further. And there you will learn in detail what are some of the most common algorithms with which you can extract value from data. In the last certification of this path, we're looking at Enterprise Big Data Science. So within this level, you're going to learn how to write algorithms by yourself. Becoming an Enterprise Big Data Scientist requires quite a bit of study and is not an easy path. But what we've done with the guides, the exercises, and the materials is to guide you in a step-by-step approach in order to learn more about these concepts so that you can start to get value by yourself. These 3 certifications are the first 3 out of the 5 levels of the Enterprise Big Data Framework. The other certifications will focus more on the architectural side. That is looking at how do you set up the technology to support that. But this is a great way to get started, and I highly encourage you to get started with learning more about this. One of the ways in which you can do that is through our partner network that we've created with APMG International. Advisors, with which we're co-hosting this webinar today, is one of those partners, and I really encourage you to reach out to them in case you would like to get more training and want to start your first journey into enterprise big data as well as to learn more about the Enterprise Big Data Framework. I would like to thank everyone for their time today, and we're opening up now for questions in case you would like to know more about the Enterprise Big Data Framework. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to seeing all of you on one of our next webinar series. Bye-bye, and good luck with the rest of your day.